All right, so here I just want to briefly distinguish between two things that oftentimes may seem the same or seem indistinguishable, and that's thoughts and the inner voice. And so by the inner voice, what I mean is the voice that we use consciously, maybe even a little semi-consciously, when we're deliberately trying to kind of think something through. So you can think, for example, I know when I go into the grocery store, I've got my list on my phone, I kind of park my cart at the end of the aisle, and I'll kind of walk down and I'll be reminding myself what I'm going down there, right? Can of green beans, bar of chocolate, something like that. And I think of that as the inner voice because I'm using it deliberately kind of in my time and space to kind of help guide myself. It's really something I could turn around and say out loud to myself. I may be a little embarrassed to be caught talking to myself out loud. So instead I'm saying it quietly to myself, again, to kind of remind myself, direct my energy, direct my attention. Thoughts are really more like bubbles rising through a bottle of champagne or something like that. They kind of come into our awareness and then they go. They could be about what we're doing. They could be about something else entirely. It could be a memory from the past, an imagining of the future, an imagined alternative present, a fantasy, a daydream, something like that. Could be a disturbing thought that comes in, right? A phrase or a word or an impulse or a suggestion. And I think one key distinction to make there is to begin to realize when that inner activity is the inner voice and when it's thought. And one subtlety I've noticed is there tends to be kind of some bleed over, and that can be an opportunity to notice both the subtlety of the difference and also to begin to recognize and to train our minds to see when we've moved from one mode to the other. And so, for example, going back to the grocery store, if I'm sitting there, I've parked my cart and I'm thinking, okay, pick up ice cream, a little cookie dough ice cream. And all of a sudden, just kind of out of nowhere, this thought comes in, ooh, cookie dough, I like that. Ooh, is cookie dough vegetarian? When was the last time we had cookie dough? Is cookie dough good for you? Right? Those are kind of thoughts like popping off, right? Like popcorn popping. And what we can do is when we notice that our inner voice, which we're using deliberately, has started bleeding into thought, that can be an invitation to either come back to the inner voice or to maybe abandon inner activity altogether and to really try to ground it through the environment. And, again, I said before, it can be difficult to talk to ourselves out loud, especially in public. It can be embarrassing. We could be worried about being judged. But I think there are even subtle ways to do it that bring us back into the body, because if we spend too much time internally and we're directing even that inner voice just to that internal space, it's really easy for those thoughts to come in and for us to quickly get pulled away, pulled out of our focus, pulled out of our attention. And so if I'm doing that inner voice, okay, get that cookie dough ice cream, let's go for it. Those thoughts start popping up. I can then try to re-anchor it in the environment. I can even just mouth it. I could just say cookie dough. Right? Say it quietly to myself, cookie dough. I could have a little fun with it, right? Cookie dough. And just doing that, just bringing it into my physical body, takes it out of that space where it's really easy to lose sight of where my voice ends and the thoughts begin, and takes it up into a realm where there really is no opportunity for bleed through, right? Although, and this is, I think another interesting thing is, you can then play with that too. You can try to continue talking in that inner voice, and notice if there's gaps in your speech, if you're not sure what to say, that thoughts will kind of almost like improv, rise up and start filling the gaps in there. Right? I know when I'm making these videos, that'll often happen, right? I have something I know I want to say, I kind of have a drive, but as I go, if I kind of step to the edge of the plateau and I'm not feeling any ground under my feet, sometimes I try to keep a flow out of nervousness, right? Thoughts will just start kind of popping up and expressing themselves out of my mouth. And then I'm kind of watching it happen and I'm like, man, I hope what I'm saying is good. I hope this is appropriate. I hope this works. Now I'm thinking about my thinking. And so all of this is to say, distinguish between the inner voice and thoughts, bring the inner voice into the outer voice, experiment with some outer voice, see if some thoughts start coming up there. And the more attuned we get to the distinction between them, right, the better discernment we have between the inner voice and thoughts, I think this really helps us to distinguish what our true desires are in that moment and what's just kind of passively going through our field. And this can make working with thoughts, right, and going into our inner voice and exploring, experimenting, trying to discover deeper truths about ourselves, much less confusing, a much less turbulent process when we really know where our true signal is, as opposed to kind of the noise.